All right, we are back for Financial Month here on the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. And today, Nicole and I are talking about the 5 most common mistakes spa owners are making that's preventing them to hit the magical 7-figure mark. And that is a number that it's a milestone number. It's kind of like your first goal is that 100,000, right? And then we immediately want to 10 times that. It's like, let's go from 100,000 to 1,000,000 right away. It's my belief that you do not have to hit 1,000,000 to be a happy and successful spa owner. You want that profit, but to truly understand that, you've got to understand your numbers, which is why we are having Financial Month here. So, Nicole, you want to kick it off with the top thing in no particular weighted amount, but one of the 5 things that we are going to be looking at as one of the primary reasons people are not able to scale to 7 figures.
Well, the first one that we have to start with that you actually already mentioned is not knowing your numbers. And this is a theme that we've probably talked about on every financial podcast this month, but it bears repeating. I think in context of growing to 7 figures, you need to be measuring certain aspects of the numbers in your business. You need to know your profit. You need to know what KPIs matter the most to your spa, and whatever other kind of metrics are going to help you measure progress in your business to understand what's working and understand what's not working. Your numbers are your one source of truth. They're a great source of feedback. They tell you where your focus should be, what you should be working on, what's already working. And so really digging into those different metrics as you're growing is critical.
I think it's that concept of what's the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And, I was talking with a very successful nurse who has got a great practice. And she said, oh my gosh, I was doing my retail to service and I think we're only at like 12%. And I said, awesome. Now we found an area where you can totally improve this. Don't be upset about that. Say, wow, I found a piece of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of opportunity here for growth. And look at that as a win. You wouldn't know that. You wouldn't find these areas of easy financial growth if you didn't know what those specific KPIs are. And it can go both ways where, hey, am I overspending in a particular area or am I underspending in a particular area? And when I talk about underspending, if you are kind of squirreling away money, if you're more of a hoarder of money and afraid to spend money on different things, you might be limiting your growth if you're not investing in marketing, if you're not investing in your team, et cetera, those types of things. And it also goes the other way, that if you're spending money on things before that money is available, which we've got a couple of topics we'll touch on in this episode a little bit later in the episode, that can also be a huge deterrent from your growth. So just having that overall knowledge in the first place is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
So let's move into not having enough cash reserves. Another big red flag that we see for spas that are struggling to hit that 7-figure mark. How do you know how much, there's so many different answers to this question of how much cash should you have on hand? What is your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I just want you to have cash. I'm less concerned how you calculate the magic number. I think that, there's different ways we can think about that. 3 months of operating expenses, maybe a certain number of payroll cycles makes you feel really good. But I like to kind of combine this calculation with your gut. Like, what is your gut telling you when you look at how you calculate some of this? Some people really are comfortable thinking in terms of payroll. I'd love to have 2 months of payroll set aside. Great. Why don't you start there and get to that number first? So I think it can be that combo. Realistically, if you, for example, have 2 months of payroll set aside and you end up needing that money for something else, it still is your cash reserve for anything that you end up needing it for. I think the key is to just get in the habit of reserving cash and having it on hand, because we can plan for the worst and hope for the best, and hopefully you don't need it, but we don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what we're going to need it for. And as you grow, like it's inevitable that at some point something's not going to go exactly to plan, and having cash to help get through those moments is going to allow you to not be stressed out as a business owner during those periods of growth.
Yeah, my CPA gave me a calculation that's 60 to 75 days of cash on hand. And again, I agree with you that there's not one specific calculation. It depends. Everybody's expenses are different. Everybody's kind of relationship with money and what makes them feel secure is different. But if you look at your business expenses and it costs you $30,000 a month to operate your business, then you would divide that by, how much money per day does it take you? So if it's $1,000 a day to in a month, right? Then you would need somewhere between 60 to 75,000 of cash on hand in cash reserves. That might feel like a really big number. So know that it can be an ongoing goal that you're saving, just like you would pay a bill. I'm gonna pay $300 a month. And that might take you a long time to get there. But if you're doing that consistently month over month over month, it does add up, and it does, eventually you do get there.
It's establishing the habit. That's the most important. Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to be a little more, I really value stability and security. I tend to want to save a little bit more in things. And I like to have more cash on hand. However, I also know that not investing that cash limits the growth of the business. So something that I did is I do have a set amount of cash on hand, and I also have a line of credit. And that line of credit, I've never touched it once, but I know that it's there. Mm-hmm. And I went to the bank, I did the application, I have it there. So if something crazy ever happened, I know I would have my cash on hand that was my liquid, but I would also have access to that full line of credit. So, maybe you can do something like that as well, where if you're trying to get to 60,000, 70,000, 100,000 cash on hand, whatever that number may be, maybe when you just have the 20,000 saved up, you have an 80,000 line of credit just to give you that kind of peace of mind,
I love that. As a former commercial banker, I think it's very normal for businesses that are, have the $1 million mark in their sights to have this line of credit. It's a very normal thing that you need to grow a business sometimes to maybe dip into a line of credit or have some sort of debt leverage. And on the flip side, people that don't realize that or go after those kind of more formalized debt structures that you can get through like a bank might rely on credit cards too much as well, which on the flip side could end up eating your cash reserves up if that happens. So it is this balance that you have to walk this line as you're growing between how you're managing these products you have access to, the cash that you're building, and how you utilize all of it.
Yeah. And it's kind of a side note here. I want to talk about credit cards for a second, because they can be a tremendous tool for the positive or for the negative. Yeah. And credit cards, you're going to end up paying probably 2 to 3 times more interest on the balance in your holding than you would if you were to get a more formal loan from a bank, or, the SBA has all kinds of programs for small business owners with great interest rates that can, save you thousands of dollars over the course of time. But with credit cards, we put a ton on our credit card every single month, but we also pay it off every single month. In 10 years, I've never carried a balance on that credit card. And I've gotten a ton of flights. I've gotten a ton of, there's all kinds of great things. So being smart, credit cards are not a bad thing by any means when they're used properly.
Yes. And they're not intended to be a use of long-term financing for your business. They're
Right.
intended to be short-term financing. I'm charging some stuff, I'm paying it off. I'm charging it, I'm paying it off. So that's how I think of the distinction.
Okay. So we talked about not knowing your numbers. We talked about not having cash reserves. Let's talk about this kind of vision. A lot of spa owners are like, I'm going to move into this location. It's gorgeous. It's already built out and it has 7 treatment rooms and I'm going to just like knock it out of the park. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times people are moving into these big, beautiful spaces a little bit too early.
Yes.
Yes.
So when I hear people, it's so amazing to have visionaries, that you're working with, and they have the vision of this business, and the spaces are amazing. And my first thought as the kind of Debbie Downer finance person is, do you have cash reserves? What's your booking percentage? Like, are you ready for this bigger space? Have you run projections on like what your numbers will look like in this new space? While you're figuring that out, like, can you bridge the gap between, even just moving has additional expenses. There's a big cost to moving, and especially when you're expanding. And so there's a lot of financial analysis that should happen if you're considering that.
If you're someone who has moved where you live, like moved from an apartment to a house or moved from one house to another house or something like that, and as someone who's moved 12 times in the past 10 years, I know that pretty intimately. You end up spending at least 20 to 30% more than you think you're going to because, you need a trash can there and you need, a piece of artwork for this wall, or you need a new lamp here, or there's so many random things that it's those trips to Target or the Amazon deliveries that it's like, well, I need shelving for the garage, or I need,
yeah, there's no such thing as a budget during the months where you're moving. It's just all is going to be what it's going to be.
Need.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand that, right? That I think it's just making sure that you can financially handle that upheaval is the key piece.
Yeah. And, I want to talk about scheduling and capacity because I think that it's very common in spa to have these like 10 to 6 working hours, Monday through Friday. And people are like, I'm just bursting at the seams and I can't do anything else. Well, could you work from 9 to 9? Could you be open on the weekends? And that doesn't mean you, the CEO, needs to be working these huge long hours. It's, can we fully maximize this space, have our cash on hand, save up a little bit of extra, or have a solid, proven marketing strategy, not just, I'm going to move and I'm going to invest, X thousands of dollars per month in SEO or ad cost, or I'm going to work with this specific, like whatever all the different marketing things are that you don't know if it works for you or not yet, or you don't know what the data from that is yet. That's a pretty big risk.
Yeah. And maybe you don't have the people yet, and that's another piece as well.
Yes. That's a big piece, especially as the visionary of a company. There is a to learn leadership, to be able to communicate effectively what you need, what you expect from your team, what you're comfortable with, is a skill that takes time. And unfortunately, it takes individuals sometimes turnover with their team 2, 3, 4 times before they understand, I need to communicate this, or I need a policy in place for this. It's normal. It's normal. You are not just a natural born leader. You can have that as a tendency, but it's a skill that you have to practice to get better at. And so if it's you who you're leading yourself, you're self-driven, that doesn't necessarily translate into, can I hire a team? Do I know how to um, lead them, where they're following the core values of the company, where they're supporting me as the CEO, where they're, um, all the things that we need besides just a big, beautiful space. That's type of strategy of just, I'm going to rent this space, is if you build it, they will come type of
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk about taking on large equipment or leasehold improvement loans. So this is, I'm slow. I want to grow to 7 figures. I'm going to buy a laser.
Yep.
I'm going to buy a new device. I'm going to invest in this particular machine. So I'm going to drop 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000, $200,000, depending on what you're buying on this thing. But I still have to get trained on it. I don't know how I'm going to market it.
I don't have cash reserves. That's another, it kind of goes back to cash reserves too, right? It's like, do you have cash reserves? Because you're going to be floating in the example of the equipment loan. In a lot of cases, you're going to be floating that if you don't have those systems in place to have the new people to know what your ROI should be. Like while you're getting that up and running, you're going to have a payment in a lot of cases. And you're going to have that payment for a long time. So do you know your numbers? Can your operating expenses handle that debt payment? Is there other debt you need to consider? What are your percentages, right? Considering all of those things before, you go do that loan is so important, is just to really think carefully about it. I usually see these numbers like after the fact, right? When people are carrying one or two of these loans and, they're struggling from a cash flow perspective, and all roads point back to, gosh, we could just get this debt paid down, things would open back up for you. Your percentages would be rebalanced. But we're pretty far down the line at that point. So, getting this knowledge, before and for next time to remember that, like, we need to run the numbers ahead of time and like carefully think through debt and how we finance it in our business and what it will do to the numbers.
And it's important to remember that, like, buying a piece of equipment is not a bad thing. It can be a great investment that can really help you grow your business if you have the cash reserves, if you have a marketing strategy, if you have your team in place. There's all of these levels of growth, all of these stages of growth, and we have to go through our own growing pains in order to get there. But it's not a bad thing to buy equipment. It's a great thing. It's just, are you doing it at the right time? Yeah. Does it make sense for the stage of business that you're in? All debt is not bad debt. When it's a bad debt is when it really forces you as the CEO to operate from a place of scarcity and a place of, how am I going to make payroll? How am I going to make rent? You're coming from this place of fear. And so then you're making decisions based on what's the quickest, fastest way to get money in, instead of what is in alignment. What's my long-term strategy? Maybe my longer-term strategy would be a little bit less money in the 6 months building up the strategy, but significantly more once we get that strategy going, Yeah. But if you're coming from this place of, I need this amount of new clients, or I need to make this amount of money, otherwise my business is going to go under, and I'm so stressed out and not sleeping at night and can't lead my team in the way that I need to lead, and that passes off. Your team feels that. Yeah. So it's really, really important. When you talk about leasehold improvement loans, that's also if you're doing a build out. Yep. So if you didn't get TI dollars, or if you are in a space and you're just wanting to do some upgrades, how are you going to fund that? How are you going, what ROI is that going to bring to your practice?
Mm-hmm. And again, same thing. It's not bad. We want to improve the space. We want it to be beautiful for our clients, but making sure that you can afford to do so when you make the choice to do so, and making sure that the timing is right. And maybe this also kind of ties into our conversation about the line of credit, maybe having that in your back pocket and getting that secured before work starts. So you have a plan B, maybe a plan C. Danielle and I are both fans of having many plans in place.
Yes. Whenever anything bad, I'm like, all right, what is the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
And then it's like, let's make 4 plans based around the worst thing that could happen. And I probably my therapist is like that. Maybe that's not the most positive way to live your life, but it makes me feel I know what I'm going to do if this happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So have a backup plan. It's probably going to cost more than you think. It's like any other home remodel or moving. It just those big things tend to be hard to predict how much they will cost. So you just have to plan on it costing more, make sure you can afford the more, and have a backup plan for how you're going to pay for it if it goes over like a certain amount. So you aren't stuck with throwing, improvements on a credit card or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And last but not least, we're going to talk about managing inventory incorrectly. So I'm a big fan of strategic ordering, but strategic ordering does not mean, oh, I'm going to save X% if I make this $10,000 order and then have 4 months of product sitting on my shelf that's, by the way, going to expire. And now I don't know what to do with it, but I saved this percent. But if you end up having to discount it to get it to move, that's a lot of cash tied up on your shelves.
Yep. Sometimes if your cash reserve is on your shelf, that's not a best practice because, you have to consider how much inventory you have with how the numbers are balanced on your financial statement with the cash that you already have in the bank or don't. And so like from my perspective, I can see this happening often by just looking at the breakdown of cost of goods sold, or sometimes it's in the operating expense section, depending on how your accountant does it. And if your operating expenses or your cost of goods sold are really elevated, like often, roads point back to inventory management issues. And that's a key that we find. It's a clue from metrics on your financial statement that kind of point you back towards looking into your inventory management processes.
So what I see a lot with spas, and this is what I'm talking about when I say I'm a big fan of strategic ordering, there's the day-to-day in a spa is busy. You don't really know exactly what you're doing, but you're always like, this patient needs this and the doctor needs this and you're like running around, and, oh, we're out of hydrofacial serum. Oh, we're out of vitamin C. Oh, we're out of, so you have all these different vendors that different times in the week, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go order that now. Oh, I'm going to go order that now. You're paying shipping. You're ordering minimum quantities. You're using your time to disrupt your productivity. You're losing a lot of money by not having a system in place that says, I'm going to understand my PARs. I'm going to block off an hour or two on the first Tuesday of the month and do the ordering from all of the accounts. I'm going to get, because I'm doing an order for the month of what I know we're going to need based on our PARs, we're going to be able to order bigger rather than ordering twice from the same company 2 weeks apart. And so we're going to get more freebies. Right. So when you look at those little savings over the course of a year, that's thousands of dollars that you've saved. And if you can do that in a lot of different areas, man, you can use that for building up your cash reserves.
Yeah.
Use that, there's so many, it's never really one giant glaring thing unless you rent a space. That's too big, too early. That can be the giant glaring thing. But, it's usually a bunch of little things.
Yep.
It's usually that just, you're like, how did that add up to $1,000?
Yeah. And that's another example I see is people who are trying to take advantage of bulk ordering. And so maybe they're doing an order like quarterly and maybe there's a couple different ones on different like timing schedules. And they're not really kind of keeping track or planning ahead for those orders from a cash flow perspective. And then maybe in July, 2 of those bulk orders hit in the same month. They're like, oh my gosh, what happened to my cash flow? It's like, well, all those costs are hitting in 1 month altogether instead of kind of allocating it across all the different months. So maybe your previous month felt kind of falsely flush because those orders there was no order costs in that month. And then they all hit, in July, and you're like, what happened? Nothing happened. It was just how you were managing your inventory costs throughout the months in between ordering. It can impact how your cash flow feels as well.
Well, and that's one of the great things about YNAB, and you taught me this, is there are going to be expenses that are annually or quarterly. And if you really love ordering quarterly and that works for you, you can still put it in YNAB as a monthly expense. And then you don't do that bulk order until that has been funded. So let's say you're spending $5,000 every quarter on back bar or on retail. If you take that $5,000 and divide it by the 3 months, then that's going to tell you how much you need. You can even do it on a weekly basis if you're saving X amount per week into that fund. So then the cash gets built up. So it's already kind of earmarked for this particular thing.
Yeah. And getting on a system like that can really help smooth out the roller coaster ride of ordering and the impacts that has to your cash flow, for sure.
All right, so let's do a quick recap for those that are wanting to kind of look into these different areas of their business. So number 1, not knowing your numbers. Number 2, not having the right amount of cash reserves. And again, that's something that you've got to have a conversation with your CPA, with your financial advisor, with yourself to understand your own comfort level, to know what that number is. Moving into a bigger space before you're ready. Don't limit that. Don't limit yourself. Don't feel like that dream is not possible for you. It is. Just make sure that you're doing it from a place where you're not operating your business with this sense of anxiety and fear and overwhelm, because that's not fair to your business. And taking on large equipment or leasehold improvement loans, again, without a strategic plan, without the cash reserves. It's not bad to invest in your business. It's not bad to invest in a new piece of equipment. However, we don't want to take on too much of the expense burden too soon. And then managing your inventory incorrectly. Retail and back bar can be one of the larger expenses of day-to-day operations in a spa. So make sure that you're ordering correctly and strategically. You can get those things in line, and that's going to help you scale significantly faster. Anything else you want to add, Nicole?
Just start with your numbers, start with one metric. I think I said this on the other podcast as well, but if this feels overwhelming to you, you just have to get started with one piece. Baby steps with your finances creates a snowball effect. It really adds up over time. So pick one place to start. And maybe it's knowing your numbers. Maybe it's just creating an automatic transfer to your savings account every month, but pick one place to start and just keep moving forward.
All right. I hope you guys have been enjoying Finance Month on the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. Please go back and listen to these episodes, but take action. Anytime that you are reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a webinar, whatever it is that you're doing, if you're not actually implementing these things in your business, you're not getting the ROI. So please do that for yourself. I promise you won't regret it. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode.